Hello, everyone. While we are waiting for Apurva to get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan from the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. So happy that all of you are joining us today for today's Flipgrid live event. So we're going to be together for some time, and we're going to be sharing a Flipgrid topic. We're going to be taking a selfie later today. So we're going to be talking about spacecraft and exploring space using different spacecraft. So feel free throughout this presentation to ask questions in that Q&A, and then we're going to be able to answer some of those questions. And Apurva, let me know if when you are sorted and if you want to share anything else.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And we have a lot of visitors from all over the world and the country visiting today that want to share where they might be joining from. So please feel free to share that in the chat. I see we have, all right, some people from British Columbia, Canada. We also have some third graders from El Paso, Texas. We have some from Ontario, Washington State. All right, Minnesota. Wow. A giant range of visitors, and we have a lot of visitors from all over the world joining us today. So thank you so much for joining us for our presentation. So let's get started. I want to share with you what we're going to be focusing on today, and that is exploring space. But we're going to do this through an interesting lens because the museum where I work is called the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. So feel free to just talk to someone next to you about what you notice looking at this image of the museum here. What might make it stand out from some museums you may have seen before. And as we are looking at any of these images today, feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the Q&A portion. We'll be able to answer some of those at the end. Great. So this ship that we're looking at, this museum that we're looking at, is a ship, a very, very large type of boat. It's so big we call it a ship. And this is the Intrepid. So Intrepid actually used to sail around the world. It's about 78 years old now. It does not sail around the world anymore, but there was a time where it used to travel all over the world with a very specific mission. So I wanted to take a look at this image that we see here that was taken right around the time Intrepid first started sailing around the world, so 1943. And looking at this image, you might notice there are some things on top. And those are airplanes that we see on top of this ship. So today we're going to be learning about a different type of spacecraft today, but to get us in the right mood, I want to talk about this ship that we're going to be exploring a little bit. So to kind of think about what Intrepid's job is, Intrepid is an aircraft carrier, meaning airplanes can land and take off of it. I want to just teach us some sign language today. So what I would love for you to do is take one hand and put it in front of you. You take your other hand and put that in front of you. Then you can put your two hands together so your pinkies are touching and almost cup them a little bit. So what you just created in sign language is a boat or a ship. So we see that Intrepid is a ship that sails around the water. We see that in this image here. But I want you to leave one hand, so this will continue to be our ship. Leave one hand out. With your other hand, I want you to make a fist. And then I want you to put a thumb out, a pinky out, and your pointer finger out. And you just created a plane in sign language. So now what I want you to do is take that plane, have that plane fly around. You can make that plane fly around really, really fast, or you can make it glide nice and slow. And you can have that plane land on that ship and take off of that ship. Have that plane land on that ship and take off of that ship. So that is what Intrepid's role was when it was created, to be an aircraft carrier. But Intrepid served in something pretty interesting, something called the Cold War at one point in its long career of serving with the United States Navy. And this Cold War has to do with this spacecraft that we're talking about today, because we're talking about exploring space. This Cold War involved two different countries. Feel free to shout out which flag this country might belong to. And this is the other country here. Feel free to shout out where you think this country, what flag this country might belong to. So over here we have the United States, and this flag on the right is the Soviet Union's flag. So a lot of us might know of another country connected to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union is no longer a country. We kind of transitioned into what we know as Russia today. And what was going on in this Cold War is that these two countries had very different ideas, that they wanted the whole world to follow along with them. So the United States wanted the whole world to have their idea, and the Soviet Union wanted the whole world to have their idea. And they were constantly competing to show the world that, hey, you should probably follow our idea. And one way they competed was something called the space race. So I want you to think about this word, space race, okay? So let's think about this idea of a race. Can you talk to someone next to you? How does one win a race? Do you know someone wins a race? Okay. So now thinking about how someone wins a race, normally I think of a finish line, right? Okay, but now we need a finish line in space. This is the space race. So can you share with someone next to you, what might the finish line be in space? And if you said the moon, you would be correct. So the finish line for the space race became the moon. So these two countries, the United States and Soviet Union, were racing against each other, trying to compete and show the world, hey, you should probably follow us and our ideas. And one way they did this was with the space race. So we have the Soviet Union and the United States competing. And this is going to help us understand why we started having all these spacecraft start to be developed in the first place because of this race. So let's start with that first step of the race. What kind of started everything? So I'm going to play a little game right now. And the way we can play is if your classroom is set up for this, you can actually walk over to the flag that you think is correct. So I'm going to ask a question. If you think the answer is the United States, I want you to walk over to the United States flag. If you think the answer is the Soviet Union, I want you to walk over to the Soviet Union flag. If you cannot walk to your class to the different sides of the flags, you can also point to the different flags. Or if you're sitting in a chair, you can move your body dramatically to one flag if you think that's the answer, or you can move your body dramatically to the other flag if you think that is the answer. So the first question I have is, which country do you think put the first satellite in space? Which country kind of started off this space race? If you think the answer is United States, walk over to the United States flag or move your body towards that flag. If you think the answer is Soviet Union, you can move your body towards that flag or walk towards it. And the answer is the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union kind of started off this space race by bringing up a satellite about the size of basketball. So you can make about the size of basketball. Imagine something about the size of basketball in front of you. That is how large the Sputnik satellite was that the Soviet Union brought up into space. Because the United States said, wow, the Soviet Union was able to bring this, we need to also bring a satellite up into space. So this took place in October 1957. In January 1957, 1958, my apologies, the United States sent the Explorer 1 satellite up into space. So, all right, we just talked about the space race. We already noticed Soviet Union won one part of that. So let's keep moving on. My next question is, which country put the first animal not only in space, but the first animal in orbit? First animal in orbit. If you think the answer is United States, you can walk over to that flag. If you think the answer is Soviet Union, you walk over to that flag. And the answer is the Soviet Union. And the first animal the Soviet Union put in orbit around the planet was a dog named Laika that you see over here. So the United States also put a few different animals in space. One of the most famous animals the United States put up into space was a chimpanzee by the name of Ham, and here we see Ham getting ready to go inside of a space capsule there. Great, I'm going to ask a few more questions. Okay, so we said Soviet Union put the first satellite and the first animal in orbit. All right, next question. Which country put the first man in space? Do we think it was the United States? You can walk over there. If you think Soviet Union, you can walk over there. And the answer is the Soviet Union. Yeah, so when a lot of us think about people going into space, we're often thinking about a very specific event that took place. But the Soviet Union was the first to send a man into space. His name was Yuri Gagarin. Just a few weeks before the United States put the first American in space, whose name was Alan Shepard. And we'll talk about that event that a lot of people might be thinking of when they're thinking about first American doing something in space. Okay. Next question. Which country put the first woman in space? Okay, you can walk over to the answer. Is it the United States? Is it the Soviet Union? And the answer is the Soviet Union again. So yeah, so this was a woman by the name of Valentina Tereshkova that went up into space in the 1960s. The United States sent a woman by the name of Sally Ride up into space in the 1980s. So the Soviet Union was 20 years before the United States in sending a woman up into space. So now we're seeing a lot of things happen, right? We're seeing satellite. We saw animal in orbit, man in space, woman in space. Who do you think is winning this space race so far? You can walk over to that flag, you think? Or you can point at the flag, you think? Interesting, right? So it doesn't see, so these are really major milestones, right? But we still have this finish line. So this is going to be my last question. Which country put the first man on the moon? You can walk over to the United States flag or the Soviet Union's flag. All right. And the answer is the United States. So just doing this, can you point at the flag? Which country do you think won that space race? Do you think it was the United States or the Soviet Union? So I remember earlier we were talking about how we think someone wins a race. And you can tell if someone wins a race by that finish line. And it was decided that the finish line was going to be the moon, which is really, really far away from Earth, 240,000 miles away from the Earth. And the reason why this was set as a finish line is because this is not an easy thing to do, to send astronauts all the way to the moon. And that is why one of the presidents of the United States, who was around this time in the space race, John F. Kennedy, he said he wants to go all the way to the moon, not because it's an easy thing to do, but because it's a hard and challenging thing to do. And because the United States did this and had someone walk on the moon first, it was kind of seen by most of the world that the United States won that space race. And here are the astronauts that were connected to that mission that had astronauts walk on the surface of the moon. So feel free to share in your class to your teachers or someone next to you, who was the first person to walk on the surface of the moon? Great, and that would be Neil Armstrong, who we see sitting here. And then the second person was Buzz Aldrin. A lot of people think Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear might have gotten his name from Buzz Aldrin, but it was Buzz Aldrin, who's the second American to walk on the surface of the moon. You might notice in this picture, you actually see a third astronaut. That's because there needed a third astronaut to orbit around the moon and pick up the two astronauts that were on the surface. And that was this third astronaut, Michael Collins, that we see here. And not a lot of people know about Michael Collins because he did not walk on the surface of the moon, but his role was very important because he was the person that bring these astronauts back home. So the very first time the United States went up into space, they didn't immediately go to the moon. It takes a lot of practice. So just if anyone here, if you play a sport, if you dance, if you play an instrument, or an artist, you're probably not perfect the very first time you attempt it. You have to practice. And that is what the United States was doing. So right now we're looking at an object. And can you talk to someone next to you? What do you think this object might be. What are some things we notice looking at this object? All right, so what we're looking at here is a space capsule, a space capsule. And this particular space capsule that we're looking at is called the Mercury space capsule. This is the first type of space capsule the United States is using to send astronauts up into space. Now, I see this sign in front of it. Can anyone try to think, how many people do you think would fit inside of this Mercury space capsule? Can you show me with your fingers? Do you think 10 people would fit inside? I think 5 people would fit inside. So this Mercury space capsule just fit 1 person inside at first, because this is what the United States is first using to send people up into space. And like I said, we need to practice. So we're not going all the way to the moon at first. At first, we're just going up into space and right back down for the United States. So I want you to talk to someone next to you. How long do you think it might take to just go up into space and come right back down? How long might that take? All right, so when these missions were just going up into space and right back down, it took about 15 minutes, just about 15 minutes to go up into space and come right back down. About 5 minutes to go up, 5 minutes for those astronauts to acclimate to that space environment, then 5 minutes to come back down. That's what they're starting to do with these Mercury missions. But then they start going on orbits around the planet, so spending more time in space. Because space is only 62 miles above the Earth. So that's kind of around the area where our atmosphere starts to end. So it doesn't take that long to just go up and down. But then if you start going around the Earth or going further out, that takes some more time. And that is what different astronauts would be doing on later Mercury missions. So this is called the Mercury space capsule. And here we see an astronaut by the name of Scott Carpenter, who was the 4th American astronaut to go up into space. And here we're looking at a rocket blasting off. So earlier, we learned some sign language to talk about a ship and an aircraft carrier with airplanes landing and taking off of the ship. But now I want to show us the sign language for rocket. So what you can do, you can put one hand in front of you, kind of straight out. And then you can put your other hand up, and like you're giving a peace sign with your other hand. Then you can put your 2 fingers together. You can even cross them. And you can put this hand right next to this platform. So if you look at this picture here, you see a red platform. That's kind of what our hand is doing here. And we see a rocket. And that's going to be our hand with the peace sign that we kind of cross fingers. So what's going to happen is we see a lot of energy being used on this space capsule attached to this rocket. So you can have your rocket start to shake with all that energy that's building up. So NASA likes to give a countdown, especially you want the astronauts to be prepared that they're about to blast off up into space. So we're going to give a nice countdown too. So we're going to start from 5. We're going to say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then we're going to say blast off. And I think we know what we're going to do when we say blast off, okay? So let's count together. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and blast off. Have your rocket blast off up into space. You can stretch, 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 stretch. Go all the way up. Great job, everyone. So that was a great job showing how a rocket blasts off up into space. So we see on this rocket, there is a Mercury space capsule. Can you point to where you think that Mercury space capsule is on this rocket? So that capsule would be right around here, the very top part of this rocket. So Intrepid has something to do with these rockets going off into space and the space race, because I said Intrepid had a very interesting job. So these rockets would blast off up into space, and that capsule would separate from the rest of that rocket. But then it needs to come back down to Earth. And here we see that capsule has a big parachute and it lands in the water. Why do we think this capsule needs a parachute, and why does it land in the water? You can talk to someone next to you or your teacher. All right, so when these astronauts are coming back down from space after exploring space, they need to re-enter Earth's atmosphere where there's a lot of air inside in this atmosphere. And because there's so much air inside and these space capsules are moving very, very fast as they're coming back down, there's a lot of friction, okay? So everyone, you can put your two hands together and move them together really fast. Kind of rub them against each other really fast like this. You feel all that heat coming from these two hands moving against each other. So when the spacecraft are moving back into Earth's atmosphere, there's so much air pushing against them. There's a lot of heat too, so you definitely want to slow down. Then you want a nice soft landing. So here they're landing in the ocean. And also what's great about the ocean is, let's say if you end up missing your target as you're moving around in space, it's kind of hard to land in one spot. In the ocean, you have a nice open area where you don't want or have to worry about hitting too many things that might be nearby. So we see these space capsules land in the water, and then you see that there are astronauts hanging out in the space capsule. And they're not going to hang out in the space capsule in the water forever. They need to get back home. So ships with very large cranes, like Intrepid, aircraft carriers, and Navy ships, would pick up these space capsules and bring them back home. And if you were to visit the museum, you would actually see an example of this crane picking up this space capsule, because that's what Intrepid did for these early space missions. So they did that once with Scott Carpenter, and another time with astronauts Gus Grissom and John Young. So here we're seeing pictures of Gus Grissom and John Young here, and they have a really funny story because they were expected on their mission to try out a lot of new space food. And I want everyone to imagine your favorite food. You can close your eyes and imagine it. And if you open your eyes, does it look like this food that we see here? Probably not. Space food has to be a little specially treated because you don't want crumbs flying around in space. You don't want liquids freely flying around in space, because space, there's a lot less gravity and things are floating around. So these astronauts had to eat this food, and they weren't the biggest fans of it. So one of these astronauts actually did something wasn't really supposed to do. He brought a sandwich up into space. And that was a bad idea, because sandwiches have crumbs. So that could have been really, really bad. And they got in a little bit of trouble for this and actually had to apologize to the government for bringing a sandwich into space. But astronauts today can enjoy sandwiches in space, but they don't use normal bread. If you look here, this astronaut Peggy Winston, and she actually has a sandwich, cheeseburger that we're looking here, but it has tortilla instead of standard bread. So again, space technology is constantly changing. And after the Gemini missions, there were the Apollo missions that went to the moon. And then NASA started working on another type of spacecraft, this space shuttle right here. So feel free to share to someone next to you something you're noticing as you're looking at this spacecraft. Or feel free to share any questions you might have about it in the Q&A. What we're looking at here is a space shuttle. So like a rocket with a capsule on top, it definitely has boosters to bring it up into space, but these this liquid fuel tank and these boosters on the side, they fall off as the space shuttle is going up into space, and then just this space shuttle orbiter goes around the planet before it eventually comes down and lands. But does this space shuttle land in the water? Give me a thumbs up if you say, yeah, I think it lands in the water. Give me a thumbs down if you think, no, I don't think this lands in the water. Yeah, this space shuttle is meant to land on land. So it lands almost like a plane. So that's why it has wheels and wings like a plane. So it blasts off up into space, then glides down like a really, 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 really heavy paper airplane. So these space shuttles were used in the 1980s up until 2011. But they stopped being used because they were somewhat expensive and they can't go that far up into space. They only went up to 350 miles above the Earth. They can't go all the way to somewhere like the moon, which is 240,000 miles away. So this is an image of a space shuttle launch. We're seeing how it blasts off. And now we're seeing how it lands. It actually lands on its back wheels, and then its front wheel goes forward. But again, NASA stopped using these space shuttles. What's interesting is for a while, and sometimes still today, NASA will ask for another country's help in bringing astronauts up into space, because NASA is currently working on another way to get into space, but they're still in progress with that. So they'll actually ask another country, and that country is Russia. So think about it. The United States started going into space, the space race, because they're competing against the Soviet Union, and that Soviet Union later turned into Russia. But now the United States is working alongside Russia to send astronauts up into space. In addition to that, there are also private companies sending astronauts into space. You might have heard of SpaceX and Blue Origin. There's a lot of different companies that are sending astronauts into space. But NASA is, again, working on a way to get astronauts up. So this is the inside view of that Soyuz space capsule, that Russian space capsule you see. There's not a lot of space for these astronauts as they're coming back down towards the Earth. So the next mission for NASA is the Artemis mission. And so there's going to be another type of space capsule called the Orion space capsule that can fit 4 astronauts inside. So Mercury could fit 1, Gemini could fit 2, the Apollo capsule could fit 3, this can fit 4. And the idea is to go back to the moon. And the United States went to the moon a few times, but a woman has never walked on the surface of the moon. So this mission is going to have the first woman walk on the surface of the moon, which is really, really exciting. And once NASA goes back to the moon, they're eventually setting their eyes on a planet. Does anyone know what planet NASA wants to go to? Mars. Yes, NASA wants to travel all the way to Mars. So that is the end of my presentation. I know you probably have a lot of great questions. Hi, Porva, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Amazing. Okay. Wow, what a fascinating presentation, right, guys? Like, I could have gone to space and come back, and during that presentation, 15 minutes, who would have thought? We are seeing some amazing questions coming through the chat, so please keep them coming. But before we get to those, let's make sure we can take a selfie with Jonathan. I'll give you a couple minutes to get set up, and while you do, make sure you share these photos with us on social. You can tag us at Flipgrid, and be sure to tag at Intrepid Museum too. So make sure everyone is in the photo. All right, do it in. All right, everyone ready? Let's do it. 3, 2, 1, say space race. All right, hopefully you got it. Make sure, again, that was awesome. Be sure to tag us when you post them using at Intrepid Museum and at Flipgrid. All right, let's finally get to your questions. So Mrs. Potter's 4th grade class is asking, is there still a race between the 2 countries to get to other planets?
Oh, great. So that is a great question, asking if there is still a race. So the United States and Russia are working together on a lot of missions on the International Space Station. And while there are different companies and the United States going up to race, not competing against each other, but they're trying to also get to all the way to Mars. There's a lot of new technology that's being developed because of that. But it's not the United States competing against another country like Russia today to get to Mars. They're kind of working together, and a lot of different countries from all over the world are helping each other because it's such an amazing thing to travel all the way to another planet.
That's amazing. It's so cool how we've gone from competition to collaboration and cooperation. And then we have another question, which is, how are space capsules now different than the old ones?
Okay, so space capsules are somewhat different because in terms of how far they have to travel. So the early space capsules, at first, they're just going up right around the edge of space and Earth. So about 62 miles up, but then they start going, maybe traveling 5 hours. But then the capsules that are going all the way to the moon, they're traveling up to 2 weeks sometimes to get to the moon and back. And the space capsules that are going to be made, called the Orion space capsules, they are similar in that they're also going pretty far. And they're going to be traveling in a rocket called the Space Launch System that looks a lot like the rocket that went to the moon. Oops, I'm sorry. Like this, but it has those solid rocket boosters that the Space Shuttle had to help it get an extra boost. Also, 4 people can fit inside the Orion space capsules when the earlier space missions were 1, 2, or 3 people.
All right, and we have one last question, which is, what is the atmosphere like on the moon and on other planets?
Okay, so when you're talking about the moon, so you're not going to see an atmosphere there because it kind of got stripped away, because you need to have a lot of mass and a lot of gravitational pull to hold on to an atmosphere. But Earth is also special because it has a magnetic field protecting it from radiation that might take an atmosphere away. So NASA is really interested in learning about Mars because Mars does not have as thick of an atmosphere as Earth's. It's about 99 times thinner than Earth's atmosphere. So NASA is currently doing a lot of tests, like sending an aircraft on Mars and seeing if it can fly in a similar way as flying on Earth. And they're also sending the rovers to Mars and investigating the soil and the rocks to figure out what might have happened to Mars' magnetic field, because at one point it did have this, but because it went away, maybe that's why the atmosphere is so thin now. So there's a lot to investigate with these planets' atmospheres.
That is super cool, and we are getting so many more great questions. Jonathan and the team actually created a Flipgrid group in honor of today's event, so if we didn't get to your question today, that's where you can go to ask all your questions. The site is flipgrid.com/intrepid. There, you can also share your favorite moment from today. Remember, you can use this in your classroom immediately following today's event as follow-up activity, and we'll post that link in the chat for you to copy and paste. Now, are there any final thoughts that you want to share with everyone watching, Jonathan?
Definitely. So we're learning a lot. We learned a lot today about early space missions, but we are so lucky that we're able to see a lot of different space missions taking place now. So definitely check out online different space launches, see all these different missions. There's so much to learn and so much great technology that comes out of these different countries working together or working sometimes on their own to send things up into space. So, and maybe some people in our classrooms tuning in today, you're going to be the next generation of scientists and engineers working on all these really cool projects.
And when you do go to space, make sure to send us photos.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Today has been so special and such an incredible learning experience. Thank you for spending the last half hour with us, Jonathan. We're so grateful. And guess what? Flipgrid has live events every single week. We have an incredible lineup, so you can head to aka.ms/Flipgrid live events for more information and to register for upcoming events. And that's it. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.